Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. Let's talk about standard cables, the sound that you get from standard cables. So, what do I mean exactly? Well, I'm referring to power cables, speaker cables, RCA cables, just like all cables that are standard, that are the most basic, shitty stuff that basically contaminates sound. So, good example is here in Denmark we use circa cables, even though it's not Danish standard. But yeah, that's what we use over here. And so typically the sound that you get is that it's gray, it's got this sort of empty shell. Everything's coming out flat in pieces where everything is kind of broken apart and slimmed down, so you don't get the full weight, the full meatiness. And you're just hearing a lot of start and end frequencies with details that don't make a lot of sense. Where there's not a lot connecting the dots between the detail. It just sounds very data-like without a lot of humanity behind it. So a good example of this is also when you listen to most headphones. Most headphones just sound very technical, where you're listening to sound and frequencies. It's not really coming together, and one of the reasons for that is that most people that use headphones don't change the cable or can't change the cable. The cable inside of the stuff is usually very bad. The plugs on the headphone are usually very bad, and a lot of these headphone setups just don't have a proper streamer, a proper DAC, whatever. But you especially hear it there because of the cables that are usually holding the stuff back. And usually you have to use a lot of money in order to get some decent cables. And suddenly, a lot of people think that, wow, this headphone is really good. Where many times it's just, a different cable, different plug. Suddenly there's, substance, priority, personality, taste, So I feel that I remember listening to a lot of homemade and triode amps, and I was just surprised, especially with cables, how big a difference it did, because a lot of these triode amps especially sounded pretty pathetic and kind of broken up in sound, where you could hear that there was potential and it was kind of good, but it was only when I changed the cables that I realized that, wow, that magic treble, that real depth, that real weight, that personality, that priority, suddenly it was there in spades, and the focus and the air and just everything. Where when you're going with normal cables, it's almost as if the personality, the priority, and also the structure just gets kind of pulled away from each other. So you just get sound that doesn't really have any significance, if it makes a lot of sense. And that's just it. It just becomes frequency and sound and bits and pieces, and you start hearing this sort of personality that's just not caring, not fully engaged. And your CD player suddenly sounds like it's been downgraded to like a bad streamer that's only half as good. And it's just that magical feeling of like when you're listening to turntable sound. If you've ever tried that before, it just disappears. It's like the humanity just left, and all you've got is this empty shell. So I think it's very much that detail is generalized, so that let's just say that you have a piano with 75 keys. The standard cables are then going to give you a sound as if there are only 25 keys, meaning that all the detail in between, all the transitioning, the start, the transitioning, the end of a sound doesn't really get to be there anymore. And because of that, you have a tonally numb sort of reaction, but Many times you can then be looking at the gear thinking, maybe I need a new amplifier, maybe I need a new speaker, maybe I need a new this and that. And that's also important stuff, really important stuff. Actually, many times more important than cables, but I feel that cables just doesn't always get the respect that it needs. And I think you just have to try a lot of different stuff to kind of realize that even on bad gear, cables actually do quite a big difference. But it's especially when you get up in gear and you get really good gear, then cables don't just make sound better, they make it magical. They make a sound session, they make a listening session last from, I don't know, 20 to 40 minutes to more, maybe 2 or 3 hours. That's what cables can do. They can really bring that magic out of the sound. So does some more expensive cables make no difference or make the sound worse? Yeah, some few actually do. And usually it's the copy cables that many times makes the sound more boosted, more harsh, tonally uncomfortable, unstable. You've typically got a very bad volume stability, got a bad layering, got a bad sense of space, and it just got bad clarity generally with copy cables. But also, not just copy cables, some of these really bad budget cables, I won't mention them, but there are some few that just, it's not a question if they change the sound or not. They definitely do, but they kind of lock the sound, like I've written here, and put it into a certain mode where it can't do bass, it can't do treble, it can't do middle range, or just sometimes takes some part of the sound hostage, overemphasizing some things or numbing some other things. So you just have to go with what you feel is right, and try a lot of different stuff. Borrow a lot of different cables home. Visit your local hi-fi store and then just buy, not buy, but borrow like 5 or 10 different RCA cables or power cables and try it. Just connect it, let it be there for like a day or 2 or 3 or 4, and then try another cable and let it be there for a day or 2 or 3 or 4. Of course, you can do A/B testing and blind testing and stuff like that, but don't put all your faith into that. That also does, to some degree, do a difference here and now, but yeah, just look into that. I made a video about that, A/B testing. How many percent of the market is truly awesome and long lasting? I would say, I've tried most cables, and I would say that less than 1% are like truly awesome and long lasting, where you feel that this isn't just giving me a spin, a priority, a certain type of personality. This is like deep stuff that's, that you're not going to change. And you usually have to pay quite a bit of money to get that long lasting effect. And I've seen so many power cables, especially, where there was potential. It was interesting. It was different. It was kind of good, but it always wasn't like fully there where it was supposed to be, where it cemented the sound and you would go like, okay, I'm keeping this forever, this cable. A lot of them for me felt like, a lot of the cables that I tried just felt like, oh, that's nice, oh, that's interesting, that's okay, just a bit of this, a bit of that, and it takes quite a long time to find those few cables that just make your jaw fall down to the floor and just makes you want to listen to music again and again and again and again and again and again. And it's just, paying for cables that have a warmth that is deep and sophisticated, my God, is that expensive. And having a proper, fully developed detail that makes you want to listen to it again and again and again without it, making you tired or making you feel like it's hectic or stressing you, it's very, very difficult. And because of that, we often choose cables that, that are basic, and keep it safe. Or the lower end of the hi-fi cables that do a bit of stuff, but they don't do it too much, because you don't want the system to freak out. So if you're if you don't believe in cables, I suggest that you try MIT mid-class to top-class cables. Just borrow those. Borrow some Fendenhull Magnum cables. Borrow Nordøst Valhalla. Borrow this, borrow that cable. Try and test that on the same system. If you don't believe in cables, and you've tested these cables and they don't make a difference, then you've got serious issues with your system. Don't necessarily think that it's because you have a bad hearing. I wouldn't say that. Those are cables that are really, really, really far apart in performance and type of sound. These are like religions that go in very different directions. So I'm not saying which cables you should buy. I'm just saying that I've noticed that a lot of people, when they borrow cables, they seem to borrow the same type of cable with a similar sound in the similar price region, and you're not gonna get very far figuring cables out when you then on top of that test it on a low quality system, on what's it called, when you test it on a low quality system, it's not really going to show you a lot about the cables, when you then only choose this very niche, small, low-end hi-fi cables, because a lot of the low-end hi-fi cables actually sound quite similar. So I would recommend that when you borrow cables that are from very different brands and very different price ranges. Even if you can't afford them, borrow them, because it makes you understand your system a lot better, and it kind of helps you put things in perspective, understanding not just what the cable is doing, but what your speaker, what your amp, what your DAC, what everything is doing in your system. And it's just cables. We don't listen to music so we can hear cables. Cables shouldn't be a thing that dominates our sound, but we have to realize that most systems in the world have either a system that's totally lacking a lot of personality and drive and direction because it doesn't have any cables, or some few systems then have this hyped pretend hi-fi cable sound that totally go in one direction, giving you one type of detail, psyching the sound up or suppressing it. So you have to, for yourself, figure out what's what. Now, I think that's a bit controversial. I'll try and go through this fast, but do we all hear sound differently? I believe that that all of us are pretty much the same. Meaning that we all hear sound pretty much in the same way, but on a surface level, yeah, we hear things in a different way, but that's just mainly because we come from different places, we have different points of reference, we've tried different amounts of systems, different combinations, and of course, on the surface, we all, in regards to the truth, understand it on different levels, simply because we all haven't tried the same thing. So what I'm trying to say is that we're all basically hearing the same stuff, and we all basically want to hear the same thing. Of course, there's small differences here and there, but so just wanted to tell you guys that when people say that, we're all different, it's not all the same. That's usually something that people want to say to you in a sort of hidden attack kind of way, where it's almost like saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, which is just, you're not really dealing with the problem. It's sort of you're just brushing people off, saying, yeah, whatever, dude. I don't think you're right, without having to deal with them, So I wouldn't say that we all hear things in a different way. On the surface, yeah. But when you dig deep into it and you give all the people the right conditions, the same journey, I believe that in the end we are all a lot more the same, and we all prefer a lot more the same type of sound, and we all will develop a mentality of wanting to hear a lot of different sounds on a lot of different levels, because your appreciation of music and gear changes a lot once you go up and once you hear levels above your own sound. It just gives you a sort of understanding of like, oh yeah, now I get it. And here's an example, if you took a guy through 1,000 levels of good sound, every time he went up a level, that would then be like the best sound for him. Like, I'm on level 5 and I'm listening to a level 10 system now. It's like, oh my God, that level 10 system is the best in the world. It's not because that's his opinion. It's because things have changed. He's gone up in levels. Now he can realize the stuff that he used to listen to was just not nearly as good. Yeah. So sound is only as relative to the degree you have gone through as many levels as possible, either having owned it or heard it somewhere else. Only when you go through the levels do you fully understand what you're hearing and why you are hearing, why you're having those particular thoughts. It's almost like being older and then going 20 years back in time, listening to the same gear you liked back then. Suddenly everything on that system that you listened to back then sounds different, because your perception of sound has changed. And many times, in order to hear difference, one must go through a lot of failed projects that involves several hundred steps to fully appreciate what is good in the end. The path of least resistance does not fully evolve the hearing, or the traditional AB way of listening to a difference is limited to the degree of having gone through a long list of possible variables. So check out my video for that, which is, by the way, not very popular because a lot of people haven't really understood the message in that video. But what I'm saying is that there is an A/B difference. Blind testing does to some degree work, but you have to go through these possible variables to fully understand what it is that you're hearing. Because many times when we're doing an A/B test, we're not directly listening to the difference in the gear. We're listening to the delayed reaction, the delayed feedback. And trust me, when you're switching cables from one power cable to another power cable, a lot of people don't realize that what they're actually doing is that they're testing one cable in one phase with another cable that isn't necessarily in the same phase. And you could be testing it on a different part of the power bar, and the cable itself has to rest. And when you're turning gear on and off, that's also a variable, because suddenly that sound resets and it has to again settle. So when you're turning things on and off, it doesn't sound exactly the same. So you might think, because A/B testing and blind testing works, that all of this is just because of the cable. No, there are at least 10 variables when you're doing an A/B and a blind test. And most people just can't get it into their heads that this stuff is real, this stuff exists. So check out that video. Not very popular video, but people have to understand this. This is like the essence of our sound, why things are so different, and why we never go truly deep into the detail, because we're constantly working with things on the surface that seems the way they are, because we're visual creatures. Everything that we see is right, and because we can't see the variables, that we just don't take that into consideration. So look at that video if you can. That's going to help you a lot and save you a lot of money. And generally, I think that's why a lot of rich people don't have such a good sound. A lot of rich people that I've visited, they have a very decadent sound, meaning that it's lifeless, doesn't have any natural color, doesn't have very good integration, doesn't have proper balance. It's usually overpowered, oversteered, over controlled, whatever. That most important part of the sound, the music, the signature, usually gets pulled way back in the background, and then you just get all of this fancy stuff, that's kind of half attacking you, because suddenly they're like, oh yeah, so now I can get some proper gear, and they're just listening to dynamic contrast, and that's nice, that's nice to have, but you need dynamic contrast with all the other stuff, especially I feel that music only really becomes music when the signature of your setup becomes a huge priority. And if we're constantly focused on the pretend neutral sound, which is basically just throwing effects at you and pretending that it's not too much this or not too much that, if you can just do all of those things, I think that that will help people a lot. So yeah, like I've said before, you kind of want to own a lot of bad gear in the start to really appreciate the more fine, subtle stuff in the end, because there are a lot of cables out there that don't do a hell of a lot. They do a tiny bit here, they do a tiny bit there, and it's very relative to the price, but price isn't totally something that dictates the sound. It's usually an indicator of something becoming a lot better, but it's important to recognize that and not just think black and white, like cables work or they don't work, or sometimes you're just listening to the money that you've spent on it. Of course, that's the thing you also have to take into consideration. The more time, the more money you use on something, the more that you will actually reach with your mind out and find those subtle differences. But that shouldn't detract from the overall experience, that what you're getting in the end is in fact something that you are enjoying more. So yeah, realize that when you use money on stuff that doesn't necessarily make the sound a lot better, realize that, well, you've put some exchange in for a product, you've supported other people, in a way you've made the world a better place, and you've gotten further in your journey, you're enjoying sound more, so let yourself have this enjoyment. Even if some of it is a tiny bit snake oil and some of the cables don't quite work or some suppress this and that, give yourself the pleasure of enjoying it, because it's a journey. You've put a lot of effort into it. A lot of people have produced a lot of audio companies that also make a lot of interesting different sound and different levels, and just because you're dealing with stuff at a lower level does not mean that you cannot enjoy that, even if it's on a lower level. So let it all come to fruition. Try everything, and try and change those standard cables. It usually will help your sound a lot. And for inspiration, you can just look at my other videos. I recommend some few cables that you try, and yeah, it does really truly make a big difference. And having said that, I'm logging off, and if you could like and subscribe and perhaps leave a positive comment or some experience down there below, it will help my channel out a lot. So yeah, that's me logging off. Bye.